It's kind of like if the movies Rain Man and Little Miss Sunshine had a baby, and that movie baby was a really big Trekkie. That's right, today we're going to be talking about the 2018 indie road trip dramedy, Please Stand By. This movie is directed by Ben Lewin and is written by Michael Galampo, and it's starring Dakota Fanning as Wendy, Toni Collette as Scotty, and Alice Eve as Audrey. Please Stand By is rated PG-13 for some brief language. So this review is going to be a brief, itty-bitty review. I'm just going to talk really quick without giving away any spoilers about some of the film's weaknesses as well as the strengths, and then wrap it up with an overall rating. If you want something with a little bit more analysis and discussion that will contain some spoilers, be sure to check out my nitty-gritty review for Please Stand By as well. So probably the biggest weakness for me within Please Stand By is going to come within the characters. One of the weaknesses within the characters of the film is going to come with the dialogue. There were some parts where the dialogue felt really realistic, and then other parts where it just felt really forced. I also thought that the character arcs were a little bit too flat for my tastes. I'm not going to go into too much more detail there, as this is a spoiler-free review, but just in general, I felt like there could have been more growth and just development overall, as far as where these characters start with and where they end. So in that regard, the characters were just a little bit too flat. They were well developed. I feel like we got a pretty good feel of who these characters are. There just wasn't a ton of development or arcs, I should say, to really make the movie, to give it that oomph. And I will say on a quick note with the characters of the movie, the main character, Dakota Fanning's Wendy, is autistic, and I was curious because I'm not on the spectrum and I don't know anybody personally who is. I have a pretty much just a base understanding of autism and the spectrum. So I did do a little bit. I don't normally do any kind of research before my reviews, but for this one I wanted to see what people on the spectrum were saying about this movie, or what people who are, more familiar with the spectrum were saying as far as its portrayal of autism. And it was kind of 50-50. It seemed like about half the reviews were saying it was, yet another Rain Man type, bland, unrealistic, robotic kind of portrayal of autism, while a lot of other people seemed to feel like it was fairly accurate. Nobody's saying it's the best portrayal ever or, anything super awesome. So that is definitely a note in there. But as far as if it's bad or, pretty good, it's really split, even amongst people on the spectrum who are writing reviews. So that was just something that, I feel like to have that split, there's probably something missing within that portrayal. So it did lose some points within the character development for, with keeping that in mind. So that's just something I wanted to note real quick. I think it's good that we're starting to get more movies that show, people who aren't just your standard protagonist. We're seeing people that have different walks of life. So I thought having a protagonist who is on the spectrum was good, and I thought it was a pretty good portrayal, but we still need, in general, within the realm of cinema, we do have a long way to go as far as accurate portrayals of, not just something like autism, but pretty much anything that isn't, straight, cis, white, not disabled kind of portrayals. There's a pretty standard protagonist out there, and this broke away from that, which I appreciated, but I do think it probably could have done a little bit more to, be a little bit more in-depth and a little bit more realistic with the portrayal. So I wanted to mention that within this spoiler-free review, because I think a lot of people going into it are going to wonder if they're just going to get pissed off because it's an awful portrayal or if it's going to be really good, and I think the answer is it's somewhere in the middle. It was a little bit difficult for me to determine kind of the strengths from the weaknesses with this movie, because it was something that was kind of down the line. Everything was solidly good. There wasn't really a ton I can point to say, this is the worst thing and this is the best thing. So I picked, for the weakness, I picked the characters, because I think there's a lot to talk about as far as the portrayal of autism and, just the different character arcs and things like that. So I kind of pinpointed that, and it did get one of the lower scores in the grid for sure, but not by much. Everything was pretty similarly scored. So with that in mind, for the strength, the highest rated category in the grid is going to come in the aesthetics. What I mean by aesthetics, that's going to be character aesthetics, which is hair, makeup, and costumes, and environmental aesthetics, which is sets, props, and locations. So this one, I'm not going to say too much just for the sake of avoiding spoilers, although there's not really tons of major spoilers in this movie. It's not something that's, had a lot of twists and turns or anything. But just to keep it brief and not really hit on any plot points, there are definitely some scenes where we kind of see the screenplay that she's writing, and we see the like a desert landscape. I thought in a lot of ways those scenes did a better job of capturing the feel of classic Star Trek than the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies. Not that I think this is a better movie than those. They're apples and oranges. It's not the same thing at all. But in that regard, like just those scenes, I thought they did a really good job of. It still felt, it felt like there was a much higher budget than the 60s show, which I'm sure there was. And, it felt more thematic, more, movie big screen as opposed to, television. So it wasn't, just ripping something out of that and putting it in this. It had its own feel that was appropriate to the movie, but it definitely, just those scenes where we get those glimpses of the, the script that she's writing. I thought that the locations within that, it was very iconic, very, very Trek, and I just really appreciated that touch. So that was one of the factors that went into the aesthetics that I really appreciated, and it was just a solid category all around. Everything looked good. So the overall score that I gave for Please Stand By is going to be a 68.33, which I consider to be a pretty solidly good movie. On my rating, I would consider a 50 to be perfectly mediocre, and around the 60 range is when I start to consider it, this is a good movie as opposed to something mediocre. So it's definitely not, it's not pushed into the really good, certainly not pushed into the perfect range, and I don't expect it to show up on anybody's, best of lists. But it is a movie that's getting largely overlooked. It came out a couple of weeks ago. It's one of those weird ones where it was released in a couple theaters, but mostly it's streaming. And one of the biggest criticisms that I've heard of Please Stand By is that it's pretty much a predictable feel-good road trip movie, which is fair. I would say that is accurate. That said, I don't think that ruins the movie. It had a little bit more meat to it as opposed to just being, purely a feel-good movie. But it's definitely fun if you are a Star Trek fan like I am. There are definitely, obviously, tons of references to it, which is just fun. If you're only interested in going in to see it, is that you're a Star Trek fan, you'll probably be disappointed because it's not, that's not the focus of the movie. It's really a character movie. I would recommend, if you haven't seen the trailer yet, don't see it. It showed a lot of the best scenes. So I would say hold off on watching the trailer. So yeah, that's all I have to say for this itty bitty review. If you want something more in depth, if you want to hear my thoughts in all of the categories on my grid, be sure to check out the nitty gritty review. And that's it for now. I'll see you next week to talk about Black Panther. Hey, thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe to Griddy Films on YouTube by pressing this button. Also, like and share this video. You can follow Griddy Films on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for new video announcements, entertainment news, fun pics, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.